Info stealers are quite common in the wild, and if you're not careful, they could steal your sensitive information such as credentials. Hence the name Info Stealer. In today's video, we'll be going over a request that was made by one of our clients inside the SOC simulator, where someone had gained unauthorized access to a contractor's personal account, and the CEO wants us to identify whether there is anything suspicious on the contractor's machine. If you want to learn how to become a SOC analyst, apply your skills in a simulated SOC environment, and potentially land an internship role, you can visit the MyDFIR SOC community down below, or head over to school.com/MyDFIR. With that being said, let's get right into it. All right, going over to the school community here, we do see a post from Zach Balrog here, where it has investigation request, suspicious activity. So let's quickly go over the scenario. It says, our contractor reached out to let me know that someone had accessed their personal account today, and they give us the month, day, and the year. I explained that this issue is most likely unrelated to us and could be tied to their own personal device. However, they have asked us to confirm by reviewing their assigned workstation, which is the contractor PC2, for any signs of suspicious activity. Could you please investigate and share your findings? I do see that Ishvac here created a report, and great job on doing so, because I say right here, an unfinished report is better than no report. As long as I have a report from one of you, then I can provide you with feedback on what you did really well, what needs to be improved, and what you could add to provide additional value. So with that being said, let's go over this particular scenario and let's see what we can find. And this right here is our Microsoft Defender XDR portal. I'll go ahead and open up a notepad so I can take some notes. And we know that for a fact, the PC for the contractor was contractor PC2. And this occurred on September 27th, 2025. We don't know exactly what the time was, but we do know the month, day, and year. So with that information, we can head over to our investigation and response, go into hunting, and advanced hunting. The first thing that you would typically look at is actually not the advanced hunting portion. In fact, you want to take a look to see if there were any alerts or incidents that triggered on the day of. So September 27th. And if I click into the alerts, we do have a couple of them here. There's potential credential stuffing, possible theft of passwords, suspicious DP API activity. And if I scroll to the right, we could see that the impacted asset is MTS-contractor PC2. And if we take a look at the first activity, it was actually on the 27th. And that aligns with the same day that Zach Balrog had provided us. Now, we could definitely use this as a starting point, scroll all the way down to the bottom until we can find the earliest event or the earliest alert generated by this contractor 2 PC, and then start from there. That is the quickest way to get started. Another way is to go through the advanced hunting and then start threat hunting based off of your knowledge. Now, depending on your experience, you might be okay with that. However, for beginners and junior SOC analysts, it might be a little bit difficult to start with advanced hunting. So my recommendation for you would be to check the alerts and then start at the earliest alert that was generated by said asset, which is this one right here, identity-RDP login to another host. Taking a look at the right-hand side here, this was generated on September 27th, 2025 at 3:42:10 p.m. And looking at the evidence, we do have an IP address of 149.34.244.131. Let's go ahead and add this into our notes. So we have a successful RDP login, and this occurred on 2025, September 27th. What was the time again? 3:42:10 p.m. So I am going to put in 15:42:10. And then let's put in the IP address, 149.34.244.131. Now we have a starting point to perform our investigation and go from there. Now we can obviously follow the chain of events via the alerts, but I do want to take you over to the advanced hunting side. That way we can start creating some queries and then I can explain what I am doing and why I am doing it. So I'll click on advanced hunting. Because there was a successful RDP login, the first table that I want to take a look at is the security event table. Why? Because this particular table contains our Windows security event logs. And my objective here is to determine whether or not that particular public IP address successfully logged into other devices as well. Now, before I do filter the time, I am going to actually type in take 10. That way I can take 10 events from the last 24 hours. I'll go ahead and full screen this so it's a lot easier to see. And if I take a look at the event ID, we do see a 4625. This is an account failed to log in. Now, this isn't the one that we want, right? We want to see the successful logins. And if you're familiar with the event IDs, a successful login is 4624 under the security event log. But before I modify my query, I do want to expand one event from the top. That way I can take a look at what some of the field names I can use to add into my query later on. For example, I do see that the event ID of 4625 lives under the field name of event ID, where E, I, and D are capitalized. The reason why I say this is because field names are case sensitive. Another field of interest would be the IP address because we did identify a public IP under the alerts. Another field of interest would be the logon type because the logon type will determine how a user or service logged in. And scrolling down, we will see a target account. So this is the account that was used or that was attempted to log in. So knowing those fields, let's go ahead and modify our KQL query. I am going to put in a where operator and then say event ID equals 4624 because that is a successful account login. Just to make sure it works, I'll go ahead and run it and we do get some information. Perfect. I'll put in another where operator. I'll say IP address equals, and then let's put in our public IP that we identified. So that is this one right here, the 149.34.244.131. Paste that in there and run that query. Now I am under the last 24 hours. So what I'll do is select the last 30 days and I can take a look here. The earliest event was on September 27th at 3:37:45 p.m. Expanding that event from the top, we can see that the logon type that I mentioned earlier was 3, and that is a network logon type. The target account was administrator, and this is the workstation name. Cool. If I only wanted to show the fields that I am interested in, I could use project. So I'll type in project, and I'll say time generated. Let's do event ID, target account, and IP address. And let's do logon type. And this particular command is going to display the columns that I specifically mentioned here. So we have time generated, event ID, target account, IP address, and logon type. Now, of course, you want to make sure to sort your time accordingly. And right now it is set to the earliest event at the top and the latest event at the bottom. If we follow the chain of events, we can see that there is a logon type of 10, aka RDP or remote desktop protocol. And we learned earlier that this particular IP address had RDP'd into our contractor 2 machine based off of the alert. But with this information, we can determine that the account of administrator was used to successfully log in, and this public IP only targeted our contractor 2 IP. Let's put that into our notes. So we know that the user of administrator is compromised or potentially compromised. And you know what? Let's do an IP reputation with abuse IPDB. We can see that this IP belongs to DataCamp and from the Netherlands. Looking at the comments here, we can see hacking, brute force. So does that absolutely mean it is malicious? Probably. I am leaning towards yes. But we do need to dig a little bit deeper to really understand what happened. Now that we have a time, which is 3:37:45 p.m., we can actually create a filter by saying where time generated between, and then I'll look between the events of 3:37 to 4:37. Or you can start from the beginning of the hour, which is at 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Honestly, it is up to you. What I like to do is take a look at plus minus an hour from the interesting event. So for example, I'll say date time, and I'll say 2025, September 27, and an hour before of the earliest event is what? It is 2:37. But in this case, I'm just going to say 14:30, just to make it nice and even. Close that off. And then I'll do another date time where it is 2025, 09, 27, and then an hour after the event, which in this case is 4:37, but let's just say 4:40. And now if I run this, it will search for all of the events that are between this time, aka the time of interest. Because there's really no point yet to take a look at the previous events that may or may not be related. What we want to do is focus on what we know. The next thing you can do, depending on your environment, you could actually comment out the event ID. And from here, you can see what kind of event IDs generated for this particular IP address. And we can see that it was 4625 and 4624. So there were only 2 event IDs. Now, in a different environment, you might get additional event IDs. Who knows? Another thing before I move on is commenting out the IP address and then search for the username itself, so the administrator, and then taking a look at the event IDs as well. Now, you might get additional hits based off of legitimate activity. So if your environment utilizes the account of administrator, then you will get a mix of legitimate activity with it. And when that happens, it's always a good idea to take a look at the starting point of your date and time. So at 3:37, so around this time, take a look at what the events that this particular administrator had done or had generated. But for our current environment, we do only have 4624, 4625, and a couple of other event IDs that are being ingested. And based off of our search, we only found the event ID of 4625 and 4624 relating to this particular IP address. Cool. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the device process events within our Contractor 2 computer. I'll use the table device process events, where device name, and I'll just say contains for now, Contractor PC2. Now this is running for the last 30 days and we do get some hits. Perfect. What I'll do is copy out this filter, the time filter, because again, we do only want to focus our effort between the time of interest. And if I take a look at the device name, let's actually change contains to equals MTS dash contractor PC2. Now we get 615 events. Awesome. I'll go ahead and full screen this. And let's make sure that our time is sorted accordingly. So I'll just click on the column. And now the earliest event is at the top. We can tell by this up arrow icon here. Now we do have quite a bit of columns. If I scroll to the right, we do have file name, folder path, the hashes, file sizes, and etc. Similar to before, we can expand the event from the top and then start selecting some of the fields that we might be interested in. For example, we have process command line. This is definitely interesting because this will show us any of the command line that was associated with that particular process. Scrolling down, we do have a initiating process. So right here, initiating process file name, aka your parent process. We do have the initiating process folder path, which is quite nice. And yeah, before I actually build out the query, why don't I scroll down all the way until I find my 3:37 event. So when the administrator logged in. And right here, I do see a 3:36. So this was a minute before the login. And then we get a 3:39. This was when the administrator logged in via RDP. Now I can just quickly take a look at the events that happened prior to the login, just to make sure that there wasn't any funky business going on. Now I do see PowerShell here. PowerShell could be interesting because a lot of threat actors love to utilize that. However, if I take a look and expand the PowerShell and taking a look at the process command line, it does look kind of weird at first glance. But then if you take a look at the actual syntax here, we do see it pointing to Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. This tells me that this is likely legitimate, likely. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next PowerShell that we saw here, which was at 3:36. Is this the same thing? Highlight over the process command line. And yeah, it's still referencing the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. And over to the right, we do see a process tree as well, where it has sense IR. And then just scrolling down, we do get our parent-child relationship. Now, those were just some of the events that happened prior to the login. And now let's take a look at some of the events that happened after the administrator logged in, which was at 3:39:20. Now, if I'm scrolling down, just following the chain of events here, we do have a couple of processes that are pretty much created upon login, such as winlogin.exe, logonui.exe, there's RDP clip for signs of RDP. And continuing to scroll down, we do see let me go ahead and expand this folder path. There is a updater.exe. Is this legitimate? What we can do is actually take a look at the SHA-256 hash. Now we could copy this and just jump into VirusTotal, but what Defender does really well is that when you click on the event and scroll down to the process tree here, we could see that, hey, it already checked for us. So we see 0 out of 72, which is quite handy. If you wanted to perform a reanalysis of this particular binary, we could just click on it. And then from here, we can click on reanalyze. Now, the reason why you might want to do this is, signatures can be updated pretty much every single day. And what was undetected yesterday could be detected today. And we still get 0 out of 72. Now, does that mean it's malicious or legitimate? Definitely not. We do need to continue doing some deep dive investigation. Now, don't get me wrong, this approach is going to take a long time. And as a SOC analyst, you really don't have a lot of time. But I did want to show you this approach because there are multiple ways to identify suspicious activity. And this is one of them, where you're trying to follow the chain of events based off of the processes. However, there is a shortcut to this where you can work a lot smarter. And that is by utilizing Microsoft Defender's alerts, whatever alert that they generated. So for example, if we go back over to our alerts, and then scrolling down here, we do see the earliest alert for our contractor 2 computer, which was the RDP login. And then there was another alert that triggered right after it. So at 3:42 p.m. And this alert is Valeria malware was detected. And look at that, we have our process tree that includes the alert signature. So rather than going through the advanced hunting and looking at each process, which again will take a lot of time, but it's very thorough, we could utilize this route to move things along quicker. Taking a look at the process tree here, we can see that Chrome was spawned via explorer.exe. What that tells me is that somebody double-clicked chrome.exe, and then it spawned these 2 processes, and eventually it had a chrome.exe moved a file, and it generated this signature. If I click into it, we do get a virus total detection ratio, which is 4 out of 62. We could see the file path of it, but there wasn't any host URL or refer URL. And this happened around 3:42:15 p.m. So let me go ahead and put that into our notes. 2025-09-27, 15, 42, 15. And I'll just say Valeria malware was detected. Wow, this occurred about 5 seconds upon login. And then scrolling down here, we do see a cmd.exe, and it executed a batch file called IRS_audit_requirements. This doesn't have any virus total detections on it. And if we follow the chain of events, upon executing this IRS audit batch file, it then spawned a PowerShell. And clicking on that, we get our command line. Taking a look here, we do see a domain of interest. Let me go ahead and copy that. And I'll just say IOC. And this happened at 3:45:18. I'll say RS audit, requirement .bat executed, or requirements. There you go. And upon running this PowerShell, let's see what happens. We get another batch file that was created by PowerShell, and this gets put into the startup folder for persistence. Now, if I expand that, we can see that here. App data roaming, Microsoft Windows Start Menu Programs Startup. And it's running this batch file. I am kind of curious what that batch file does. I wonder if I can find that here. And if we take a look over on the right, we see a virus total detection rate of 0. And if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we also get a file prevalence. And looking at the worldwide observed devices, the first seen was actually what appears to be this event. Cool. Out of my own curiosity, I'm going to copy that and then just put a note for myself. Let's say, try and identify what this batch file does. Now let's continue on. The PowerShell also, put this batch file into the startup. We know that already. And, what is this IP? Why is there a private IP here? Similar IP address here, and it's involved in 2 alerts. So let me go ahead and click on that. Suspicious behavior by CMD and an uncommon file was added. So this was the batch script, And suspicious behavior by CMD. Okay. You know what? Before I move over, let me just go back. I don't want to move too quickly. Let's continue on with the chain of events here. The next signature is renamed AutoIt tool. And if I click on that, what does this say here? Alert description, an AutoIt executable with a non-standard file name launched. AutoIt can be used to launch crafted scripts that perform malicious actions. That's good to know. And yeah, this was the process that was created, a long random string. And if we follow that chain of event here, which occurred at 345.34, we could see the virus total detection ratio, which is 1 out of 72. So to recap, before I move on to this system.bat file here, chrome.exe was launched via explorer.exe, meaning that somebody double-clicked Chrome and then likely went out and downloaded malware, as we can tell by this signature. About 5 minutes later, a batch file under the downloads directory was executed via CMD. That particular batch file then spawned PowerShell.exe with a nasty encoded command that did contain a domain. So we can utilize this domain and search across our environment to see if there were any other devices that reached out to this domain. But that is an activity that we can do later. Within this particular PowerShell, it then spawned additional stuff. So it spawned a batch file that was automatically moved to the startup folder for persistence, meaning that if this particular computer was restarted, this batch file would then run automatically upon login. However, we don't know exactly what this batch file does just yet. In addition to this batch file, another exe was executed. And what exactly does this executable do? That I am not entirely sure yet. But we do know that it is a renamed AutoIt tool, and based off of Microsoft's alert description, AutoIt is used for malicious actions, or can be used for malicious actions. Taking a look at the command line, I do want to keep in mind this right here. So this is different than the executable that was spawned by PowerShell. Notice how it says TVL, and this one is TF. I believe that's an I. So there was some funky command line argument business going on here. Let me go ahead and copy that, and I'll just paste that in here just for now, as a note to myself. So that essentially is the recap. We don't know exactly what the persistence batch file does, nor do we know what this executable does. But if we take a look at the event that happened at 3:45:21, we could see another batch file that was executed called system.bat. And I'll put this into my notes. System.bat executed. Now let's follow the chain of events for that one. So upon execution, a PowerShell process was created, and it does go out to the same domain, but it is referencing a different text file. This one starts with JKJ, and then the other one starts with IDT. So yeah, two different text files. Upon reaching out to the domain, what happens here? Another batch file was created by this PowerShell process, same IP here, and this was added to the startup folder, again, for persistence. Cool. So there were two files that were added into the startup folder, and that appears to be it for this particular alert anyways. And before I move on, let me go ahead and copy this batch file and paste that in there as well. I'm kind of curious to know what this does. And this is in the same directory as our previous one. And then we have another funky process here. This one was different than the previous one that we saw earlier, but it does have the same extension of .au3, which is AutoIt's extension if I remember correctly. So let me go ahead and paste that in. Yeah, there you go, AutoIt. It's the file format for that. All right, let's go back to our alerts and then continue to take a look. So we know that the uncommon file was created and added to the startup folder where those two batch files. Suspicious behavior by cmd.exe was observed. I wonder if this is different than the one that we just took a look at. So I scroll down until we see some alert signatures. Ooh, this is different. At 3:41:48 p.m., chrome.exe moved a file called cyanidation.exe. And wow, a suspicious file was observed, process was injected, exploration activities, possible theft of passwords. Aha. So right here, because of this alert signature, it is likely that upon execution for this particular process, any kind of passwords that were stored in a browser were exfiltrated. And based off of our scenario here, where it says our contractor reached out to let me know that someone had accessed their personal account today, this tells me that the contractor likely saved their passwords in the web browser, which is likely how the attacker successfully authenticated to the contractor's personal account. Let me go ahead and copy the time. So this was at 3:41:48, 3:41. And that was before our successful RDP login. Interesting. 27, 15, 41, 48. This will be cyanidation.exe was executed. Going over the a suspicious file was observed signature, over to the right, scrolling down, ooh, where did these come from? And if I click on that, we can see the virus total detection ratio is 12 out of 62. And the file path is located under our temporary directory. Okay, I'm going to copy that. And let's do the same for the other two. All right, let's continue on. So now we get a process was injected with potentially malicious code. And taking a look at the evidence, yeah, we do see the 3 executables that we just copied. And if I click on view all, there is this batch file, which I'm not sure if I have added this into our notes. Yeah, this one is new. Okay, let me go ahead and click on that. And this is located inside of our temporary directory. There were no detection ratios for virus total. Nice, we do have a lot of information that we can start searching afterwards. Going over to the next signature, this is likely our same processes. And then we get the possible theft of passwords. Taking a look at the evidence, we have the logon data, which does contain the credentials for any saved passwords. But there is also a new process called app-launch.exe. And taking a look at the process ID, it is 11244. So let me go and copy this one, as well as the process identifier for the cyanidation.exe, which is 8228. Put that in there. And the cyanidation.exe, this one is PID 8228. And if we scroll down, we have our Valeria malware was detected that we saw. A process was injected with potentially malicious code. I believe we saw this one as well. This one's a little bit different because it does reference the app launcher rather than the 3 random executables. We can see that they opened up the batch file using notepad.exe. And then at 3:45:14, cyanidation.exe was executed. And if I put that in here, and now that I think about it, I made a mistake right here. The first event, so cyanidation.exe wasn't executed at 3:41:48. It does make it seem so based off of this process tree, but actually 3:41:48 was when chrome.exe moved cyanidation.exe. In other words, this was when cyanidation was downloaded, as we could see the file path here. And it wasn't actually executed until right here, 3:45:14. Because if I click on the cyanidation.exe, we can see the command line here where it just has the file name. So this tells me that is when the file or process was executed versus this one where the chrome.exe moved the file. We don't see any kind of command line or execution here. Although there is a tag called remote execution, which can be a bit confusing. But yeah, this is based off of my observation. So instead, I am going to change this from executed to downloaded. And if we scroll down to take a look, we did go over the suspicious sequence of exploration activities. And just in case, clicking on the signature itself, scrolling down, we do have the 3 weird executables. So to quickly recap before I move on to the app-launch.exe, let's open up our trusty notepad. The earliest event was on 37, I believe. And you know what? Let me just make sure. Yeah, 3:37:45. And this was the logon type of 3. But what I am interested in is the logon type 10. And if I take a look at the time generated, it actually generated at 3:39:22. Okay, let me slow down and put in some notes. logon type 3, successful logon. And then 2025, 09, 27, 39, 22. This was a logon type 10, successful logon. So what exactly was the 154210 that I put into my notes here? Well, let me go back over to the alert, which is right here. And the reason why I put that in is because I was taking a look at the generated on timestamp. So we need to be careful with that. And instead, we wanted to take a look at the first activity instead, which is 3:39:22 p.m. The generated on is actually the alert that was generated. So when did the alert generate? That occurred at 3:42:10 p.m. Rather than saying successful RDP login, we could say successful RDP login alert was generated. And that would be more correct. And I'm showing you this because Microsoft can be very confusing at times. And looking at the timeline here, I do need to swap these two. So like that, and that is correct. Okay, perfect. Let's go over a recap because that is what my original plan was. So on September 27th, 2025, at 3:37 p.m., there was a successful logon type 3 from our public IP address 149.34.244.131. 2 minutes after, this public IP address successfully RDP'd into our contractor 2 PC using the account name of administrator. 2 minutes after that, cyanidation.exe was downloaded via Chrome. A minute afterwards, our alert of successful RDP login was generated. Within a couple of seconds, Valria malware was detected as the alert signature, and this was likely based off of the cyanidation.exe download. 3 minutes later, cyanidation.exe was executed, and along this execution, there were these weird executables along with one batch file associated with that execution. 4 seconds later, IRS_audit_requirements.bat was executed, and because of this batch file, a PowerShell process was executed, instructed to reach out to a domain called files.catbox.moe, .moe. I think that's how you pronounce that. And then it created a batch file and moved it over to the startup directory. This is likely for persistence. 3 seconds later, system.bat was executed, and similar to the IRS_audit_requirements.bat, a PowerShell process was spawned and reached out to the same domain, but referencing a different text file. And then that text file created a batch file stored under the same startup directory. Additionally, there were 2 AutoIt executables right here, which likely performs some malicious activity. So that, in a nutshell, is the recap. Now let's take a look at what the applAunch.exe does. Going back over to the alert, scrolling down to applAunch, and learning about this, we can see that the cyanidation.exe is responsible for creating the applAunch.exe. And this occurred at 3:45:50 p.m. Just to make sure, if I click on the applAunch.exe, I can see the command line right here. That tells me that this process was executed. Now let's put that into our notes. 2025, 09, 27, 15, 45, 50. applAunch.exe executed. A process was injected with potentially malicious code, which is likely our app launch here. So this was likely the process that was injected. We can see applAunch.exe performed system hardware discovery to try and obtain some additional information based on the compromised host. And we don't really see the commands here, but we might be able to see it when we run some KQL. Nope, I lied, it's right here. WMI query select star from win32_processor. After that, it does a security software discovery, and it's trying to look for our antivirus products. And I am going to note that down here. So app launch, it appears that the objective for app launch is to perform discovery commands. I'll just say discovery commands and select star from antivirus product. And the other one was select star from win32_, what was it, process? I think it was process. Oh, processor. Okay. Cool. Let's continue on. So this is the same thing, security software. And ooh, attempted to decrypt credentials. This is for Microsoft Edge. So it's not only discovery commands. Let me go ahead and change that to malicious activity. And let's say decrypt credentials from Microsoft Edge. Accessed browser saved passwords. And yeah, that seems to be it for this app launch here. The last activity occurred at 4:31:02 p.m. 2025, 09:27, 4:31:02. I'll say app launch.exe accessed browser saved passwords. And if we take a look at the signature and scroll down to the first and last activity, we can confirm that this was the last activity here, 4:31:02 p.m. And if we scroll down, this is essentially the things that we've already seen previously. Now that we're pretty much done with this particular alerts, these are the questions that I came up with. Where did the user download these files? And I'm trying to identify the domain/IP. And then, were those batch files executed? If so, what do they do? So the batch files that I'm referencing is this one right here, along with the 2 batch files that were located under the startup directory. So I want to identify that. Were those random exe files executed? So these ones right here, the ones that were associated with the cyanidation, and also these ones. These 2 were likely executed because we did see the command line for that, but I don't know exactly what they do. Did any other assets reach out to the identified domain? When I say identified domain, I am talking about this one right here. So where did the user download these files? If they reached out to, let's say, a command and control to download those files, I want to check my environment to see if anybody reached out to that domain. And I also want to double check this as well, the files.catbox. I want to see if there's any assets that reached out to this one. Finally, do any of the IOCs exist on other assets? So we have the app launch.exe. I mean, this one was a process injection, so we might not see that. Instead, I'll take a look at the cyanidation and the other files that were dropped onto disk. So the zaf.bat and these 3 random executables and the 2 batch files under the startup directory. And that will essentially help me scope out the environment, just to make sure that this PC is the only one that was infected. All right, let's go back into our alerts and let's see if there's any other ones that we've potentially missed. So we know the suspicious file, sequence, yes. There is an endpoint, unusual PowerShell execution. What is this? So we know that there's a cyanidation here. There's app launch, yep. So it's doing its security software discovery, again, looking for antivirus. And look at that. App launch.exe created this file. And this occurred at 4:24:59. Okay, let's add that in here. So 16:24:59. App launch.exe created, let's go ahead and copy that, created this file. And if we scroll down, this file was located right here. Cool. And if I take a look at the alert, we do see an IJN and an STB. So yeah, these are the 2 or 3 executables that we already noted down. Does it tell us what they do? No, not really. Okay, that's too bad. It created the file, but then we want to take a look and see if it was executed. But after the STB, there is a ZZ8. Do we have this one? And ooh, we do. This is the first one here. So wait a second. I think, yeah, we're missing this, the IJN. Okay. This executable we're missing in our notes. Where was this file dropped? This was dropped under the temp. Okay. Let's go ahead and add that in there. And let's scroll down. Yeah, it creates the ZZ here and also the bat file. And ooh, upon execution. So this is what I was trying to find, right? Based off of my question, were those batch files executed? If so, what do they do? So we do know that ZMF was executed. And when was that executed? This happened at 4:26:56 p.m. 2025, 09, 27, 4:26:56. And I am not going to write that down. So I'm just going to copy this, paste that in here. Was executed. Nice. Now let's follow the chain of events for that. Upon execution, a PowerShell script was, wow, that's a lot of Base 64. But as I was saying, upon execution, a PowerShell process was created, and then it ran this large base 64 command. That is very cool. I'll copy the base 64, open up a site called CyberChef, and let's paste that in here. Okay, it doesn't seem like I copied the entire thing. Let me do that. There you go. And I'll remove the PowerShell and also at the bottom here. So I'll remove everything after the two equal signs. Now I'll just double click the from base 64, or you can click and drag. And then we get a nice PowerShell code. So you might notice that there are a lot of dots here. What we can do is type in null bytes and remove that. And you know what? I am kind of curious to see what AI thinks this does. So I am going to copy the code, go into Claude AI, and then type in, what does this code do? And let's see what Claude AI comes up with. After a couple seconds, let's see. Primary function downloads disguised payloads and executes arbitrary .NET assemblies in memory. Downloads fake image files from this particular domain, or from these two domains. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And under the batch file, downloads image, or I should say downloads fake image, extracts the base 64 encoded payload, decodes it, and it spits out the critical indicators. Now looking at this particular string, something tells me that it is in reverse. As you can see here, it is encoded, so encoded.txt. This tells me that this IP address is actually 212.11.64.108. As per Claude AI, is likely the C2. And I'll add that in here. So I'll say reverse is 212.11.64.108. Out of my own curiosity, that is in Switzerland. Does virus total say anything about it? Yes, it does. 8 out of 95. Beautiful. Hey, look at that, Coinbase. Let's go back over to our alerts here, and let's continue on. So that batch file went out and downloaded 2 fake images, decoded them, and did something nasty. Eventually, the app launch.exe attempted to decrypt credentials, and I believe this one was for our Microsoft Edge. Yeah, right here, Microsoft Edge. App launch.exe opened one file, which is the login data. And yeah, just continue to try and open up the login data file to access our passwords. And that is essentially it. Okay, let's go back and take a look at the other alerts. So we have our suspicious DP API activity and the possible theft of passwords. Now, we already gone through these, so let me go back over to my notepad and let's try answering some of my questions here. Where did the user download these files? Now, the one that I'm most interested in was this cyanidation.exe, because if we scroll all the way up and taking a look at our event after the successful login, cyanidation was downloaded, but we don't know exactly where it was downloaded from. So I am kind of curious to know where it was downloaded from. To do this, I'll head over to Hunting, Advanced Hunting, and I am going to filter, whoops, what did I do? Okay, time, yep. I am going to filter for device network events, and I'll copy the time filter. And you know what? Let me just copy this one as well. From here, again, sort out your time. Now we have the earliest event at the top, and we have the remote IP, remote port, the remote URL. There is the protocol and initiating process SHA-1. So we got our hashes here and the process file name. What we're essentially looking for is where Chrome was used to download the cyanidation.exe. Now, why Chrome? Well, that is because the alert mentioned it. It said Chrome was responsible to move that file into the downloads file. So I am going to filter where initiating process file name is Chrome. Type in where initiating process file name, and I'll just say contains. So contains Chrome. Perfect. Let me full screen this, sort out the time. And here we have 3:40:26 p.m. And if I open up my notepad around 3:41:48, that was when cyanidation was downloaded. Scrolling down to 3:41 and taking a look at the events between the time of interest, which again is 3:41:48. So 3:41:49 is 1 second after. And if we take a look at the URI, it is update.googleapi.com. So that is likely not it. So let's take a look at some of the events prior to the download. Right here, there's a 341.40, and this went to 142.251.167.95. What is that? That is Google. So that is likely not it. And then the one right above it, this happened at 341.25. This is going out to an IP address of 212.11.64.108 on port 80. Let's open that one up. And if we scroll down, ooh, this looks interesting. HTTP and a 2_encoded.txt. This might be the IP of interest. Let me copy that and throw that into abuse IPDB. And that is located in Switzerland. But if you take a look at VirusTotal, look at that. This was the same IP that we saw earlier via the PowerShell script. Isn't that cool? So what we can learn from this is that that IP is likely where cyanidation came from. And actually, you know what? Let me just go ahead and filter directly for it. So where remote IP equals, let's paste that in. Now let me full screen it, sort my time, and let's take a look. So system.bat was requested. You can see the icons here, cyanidation, system VBS. This, we had no idea because we didn't see this in the alerts. So this right here is a IOC of interest. Now, of course, we can also copy the blank.gif or GIF, however you like to say it, but I'm not going to do that. And let me reorganize this just a bit, make it a little cleaner. So I'll copy these, put them at the top because that's where my IOCs are. And I'll rename this as timeline. And I think that's it, right? Okay, let me remove this. And yeah, that's a little cleaner. Perfect. So we have the system.vbs file, 2_encoded.txt. There is the IRS audit, the weird encoded text files, and a system.exe. What is this? This system.exe didn't appear in our alerts either. And just to make sure, based off of my questions here, right, we now identified where did the user download these files? Well, it was from that IP address. And then the question here, did any other assets reach out to the identified domain? Well, let's take a look and double check. I'll go ahead and comment this one out. And let's comment out the time filter. And you know what? Let's comment out the initiating process as well. So now we're just looking for the remote IP address of this external IP. And taking a look at the device, it only appears to be MTS contractor PC2. Now, just to make sure, we could say where device name does not equal MTS contractor PC2, and we get no results. So that tells me that there were no other assets that communicated with this IP address. Cool. So that answers this question. I'll say no, only contractor PC2. And then the next question was, were those batch files executed? If so, what did they do? Now, those batch files, we do know that the ZMF batch file was executed, but we don't know the two persistence ones. So let me go ahead and search that up. I'll use the device process events, and I'll expand the time frame to, let's just say 5 p.m. And then I'll say where process command line contains, and I'll paste in our batch file. And we don't get anything. So that tells me that this batch file was not executed. Okay, what about this one? And same thing. Just to make sure that I am using the correct syntax, what I can do is search up the batch file that I know that was executed and check that. And there is one event. And we already confirmed that this batch file was executed. Okay, what about those random exe files? So the first one, nothing found. The second one, nothing found. The third one, nothing as well. And the fourth one, nothing as well. Again, just to make sure I'm doing the correct thing, I can search for the cyanidation. And we do have a process here. Now, what about those auto-it executables? So this one. And yeah, there's only one event. And that one event we saw already based off of the alert. But it doesn't really tell us what it does. And that's okay. We kind of have an understanding based off of the timeline that we created. Just to make it complete, let me go ahead and search out the last one here. And yeah, that one event. Now, to answer our last question, do any of the IOCs exist on other assets? Rather than searching these up one by one, we could actually create a list or an array. And to do that, I can just type in let IOC equals, and I'll say dynamic. And then let's put in our IOCs. Make sure you surround it in quotes though. just like so. And make sure you close it off using a semicolon. And then I can say where process command line has underscore any IOC. So our list here or array. And then I can see that there are 3 events that was generated, but it is all for the PC2. But that is because I am filtering for PC2. But knowing that this query works, now I can just comment out, or actually, I'll just say where device name does not equal, and I'll comment out the time. And it's looking over 30 days and no results found. This answers my last question, which was, do any of the IOCs exist on other assets? Now that I think about it, I forgot to take a look at the cat box one. So I'll say where remote URL contains cat box. And let's comment out the time and also do a where device name does not equal. Okay, just to make sure that my query works. Beautiful. So we do know for sure that cat box existed on contractor PC2, but if I do a do not equal, we get no results found. Now we can just go ahead and follow process, whatever that process may be. Out of curiosity, I logged into the contractor 2 PC, and this is the startup. So we have our 2 batch files. What do they do? Okay, so upon login, it executes a PowerShell command, and it executes whatever this encoded command does. Open up CyberChef, let's do a new tab and paste that in. Okay, we can see that it starts process where the file path is local app data, and it executes that random file name where the argument is the AutoIt extension. And that's how it maintains persistence. If I open up the other batch file, it is likely the same thing. And here we go. Yeah. So these are the 2 AutoIt file extensions. And if we open this up in Notepad, wow, that is a lot of interesting data. That would be pretty cool to deobfuscate and actually see what it does. So you know what? I am going to just copy these for reference, and I might do that in the future. Based on the investigation that we just concluded, here is my summary. So the compromise began with a suspicious logon activity that occurred on September 27th, 2025 at 3:37:45 UTC. This was a logon type 3 followed by a RDP logon, and within minutes, the attacker then began deploying malicious payloads. And it progressed through malware deployment, including cyanidation.exe, multiple batch files, and app launch.exe. The most concerning activity occurred when the app launch.exe performed system reconnaissance, as we saw, where it was querying Win32 and antivirus products. It then likely harvested our browser stored credentials from Microsoft Edge. And this was likely the reason behind an unauthorized account login that the contractor had noticed. The batch file, so this one right here, this was executed, likely downloading what appears to be disguised images containing embedded malicious code. And again, this is just based off of Claude AI's analysis, so take that with a grain of salt. And it established a communication with the identified C2 server, which was that IP address but reversed. And the overall attack lasted approximately 54 minutes. Now, this time frame is based off of the alerts. As you recall, we did see a first and last activity. To prevent making this video incredibly long, which I believe it already is, I did want to let you know about some of the bonus questions that I didn't answer. And that is, did the administrator account log into other assets during the time of interest? Because we did search up other IOCs and we didn't find any. However, that doesn't mean that the administrator account didn't perform any lateral movement, right? Let's just say that the administrator account went out, downloaded some malware, executed that, all that good stuff. But right after that, they might have pivoted into another computer and started doing some other unrelated activity, right? And we didn't check that. So that is a question that we need to answer if we have more time. The second one is, what is the last known activity for this incident? As you recall at the top here, I did say that the attack lasted approximately 54 minutes. And again, this is based off of the alert itself. Now, any activity that was not detected by an EDR wouldn't show up in the alert. So that is what we need to take a look at as well. Because you never know, maybe the attacker executed some additional living off the land binaries that the EDR just didn't catch. And if we just relied based off of the alert telemetry, then we would be missing out on the other stuff. But again, this is only if you have enough time. What we did by going through the alerts and following the process chain, that in itself is essentially good enough to come to a conclusion that, hey, this contractor PC too was definitely compromised. But if you have additional time and you really want to make sure that nothing else is happening within your environment based off of this incident, these are the questions that you want to ask and try to find answers for. Hopefully you guys learned something new. I definitely had fun going through this investigation, and I know this was probably an incredibly long video, and I do apologize. But I really wanted to show you some of the thought process that goes on behind the scenes whenever I'm investigating an alert.